Hey there! Welcome back to another review, this time of a film that is considered by many to be one of the worst films ever made. And it's also a movie that I personally enjoy quite a bit, and I would have to say it ranks pretty high up there on my personal list of some of my favorite films. It's a movie that's near and dear to my heart, even with its flaws, and that film is Howard the Duck. Now, Howard the Duck is a movie that I have a pretty lengthy history with. I grew up with the film. I watched it on VHS numerous times, hundreds of times. I rented this movie constantly from my local video store. So much so that when I was at the mall and browsing and checking out the movies and stuff that was in Suncoast, when there still was a Suncoast in the mall over in Tigard, over, I don't know if Tigard's not the right one. Well, it was over at the, trying to remember. I should know the name of this mall. It's like I used to go Washington Square. It's a mall in Oregon. And there was a Suncoast there, and they had the film on VHS. And this was at a time when there was no Howard the Duck DVD. It was one of those few films that was not on DVD, and I just thought it was never going to happen because either George Lucas didn't want it to be on DVD, or the studio didn't want it to be on DVD for whatever reason. And I understood because it was known as a pretty big bomb, critically and financially. But it was there in VHS, and it was actually pretty affordable, and it was brand new. I think my mom paid like $10 for it, or maybe it was 20. I don't know. I mean, for a VHS tape of Howard the Duck at that time, which was a movie that was only on VHS, it was a pretty decent price. She bought it for me, and because even she was tired of renting this movie and having to return it to the rental store. I still to this day do not know what pulled me to this movie. What really drew my attention or really just grabbed me about Howard the Duck. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's because I was watching similar movies like this. Like, I grew up watching things like the 70s live-action Spider-Man TV show. The VHS tapes from, I think it was Playhouse, which is like a subdivision of Key Video. And I grew up renting and watching the 70s Captain America TV movies, starring Red Brown, the 1990 Captain America movie with Matt Salinger, Swamp Thing, Return of Swamp Thing. You know, Howard the Duck fit pretty well into that group of movies. So, and in comparison to a lot of those other comic book films, I would have to say Howard the Duck is the best one out of those ones that I've mentioned. I don't think it's even on the same... I don't even think it deserves to be considered one of the worst comic book films ever made. I really don't. Especially considering it's an adaptation of a Marvel comic that is about a talking duck from outer space who ends up on Earth and has a human girlfriend named Beverly, and goes and deals with all these misadventures on Earth. And I think there was even like a whole campaign where it was like Howard the Duck for president, and there's all this kind of stuff. His character was introduced in a Man-Thing comic, so this is a very strange, weird character to begin with. So the movie, in my opinion, is actually one of the better comic book adaptations because it manages to capture the spirit of the comics rather well. But it doesn't have as much of the edge as the comics did, and it isn't as crazy and weird and silly as the comics are. The comics are actually even crazier than the movie. I know it's hard to believe, but in the comics, there are some really nutty things going on. I mean, the comics, one of Howard's main villains in the comics, Steve Gerber's comics, is a villain named Dr. Bong, who has a giant bell for a head. So, you know, the film, in all honesty, in my opinion, could be a lot worse than its reputation suggests that it is. I've seen much worse films than Howard the Duck. I mean, especially in the comic book genre. The 70s Captain America TV movies. The 1990 Captain America film, which I can watch as a guilty pleasure, but it's still a pretty shitty film. Catwoman with Halle Berry, Batman and Robin, Steel. These are all films, in my opinion, that are a million times more worse and more incredibly hard to sit through, and films that have next to no redeeming qualities over Howard the Duck. Elektra. I mean, there are much worse films out there than Howard the Duck. I'll take Howard the Duck over Thor: The Dark World, because at least Howard the Duck is different and unique, and actually does have some things that I remember about it, for better or for worse. Thor: Dark World, it's just completely forgettable in every aspect. But anyway, Howard the Duck is a 1986 film that is a real oddity. It is such a bizarre movie, and it is equally bizarre that this movie was even made. Because, especially with the budget that it got. This had a budget of $38 million, which back in 1986 was a crazy amount of money. And, I mean, that definitely put the film behind the 8 ball big time before it even was released in theaters. I look at this film as a big budget B movie. It has a lot of the same sensibilities as a B movie does. It's like if you had a Roger Corman production and you beefed up the budget and gave it like a crazy amount of money. That's Howard the Duck. And if you get a kick out of those type of movies, I think you can get some enjoyment out of the film. The only other movie that I can really think of that really does capture, that is as interesting and as unique as Howard the Duck from this same genre, I would say, is the Super Mario Brothers movie, which is another film I really enjoy. I also think that's an underrated film in its own right, and I don't think it deserves its reputation as one of the worst the worst video game movies ever made. Just like I don't think this deserves this reputation as one of the worst comic book films ever made. But that's a whole nother story. It's for a different video. But anyway, yeah, so this film was released in 1986. I believe it was actually released in the summer. It did not do well, as history has shown. It made $38 million on a 30... I think it made 36, or it cost $36 million, and it made $38 million worldwide. It was a big bomb in the U.S., where most of the money is made. It didn't get another release except for a decent sized release in the UK, where it was called Howard, A New Breed of Hero. It didn't even have Duck in the title, because apparently the Duck was just such a bad thing to have in the title, because this movie was, by the time it hit the UK, it was known as this huge bomb. The movie only got made because of George Lucas. And if you ask me, this is far from the worst thing George has ever been a part of. I mean, the Star Wars prequels to me are all worse than Howard the Duck. Even Episode 3, which I can watch as a time waster, I honestly like Howard the Duck more. Because there's something about Howard the Duck that just keeps me going back to it. I think part of it is how strange and surreal and weird it is. And how it's all these different, how it has all these different genres and different elements that are all interspersed into one film. It's an interesting broth that really, it has a very distinct flavor to it. And I definitely understand now why it has a cult following. I can see why I'm not alone when it comes to a person, when it comes to the love of the film. Because even with its flaws, and it's a movie that over the years, I admit, I don't think is as flawless as I once thought it was. It's a movie that there are certain things about it that after the 201st watch of the movie, the most recent watch, which was today, by the way, I noticed more problems with it than I didn't before. But even those problems, I'll take over some of the worst the worst, just really generic bad movies. Like, even at its worst, it's just bad. It's not horrible. It's not abhorrent. It's not, it doesn't even piss me off even at its worst. It's just like, oh god, that's pretty bad, I have to admit. It makes me roll my eyes, or I groan at some of the jokes. Or something doesn't work, or it doesn't quite click. I'll take that. Even its failures are more interesting than entire movies that have come out lately. I'll take Howard the Duck and its problems over the Total Recall remake starring Colin Farrell any day of the week. Or Ghostbusters with Paul Feig. Or the RoboCop remake. RoboCop. I'll take Howard the Duck. So, yeah. This will be interesting, because I know I did a video before on my other channel about this movie, but I thought it was too long, so I'm going to try to get my thoughts across when it comes to this movie in as short amount of time as possible. Because I don't want this to be over an hour. I love this movie. I really like this film, warts and all, feathers and all, but I just don't want to spend nearly as much time talking about the behind the scenes and stuff like that as I did in the past. But anyway, yeah, the film cost about $36 million, only made about $38 million in the box office. It came out in August of 1986. It was heavily marketed. There was like a giant inflatable egg. There was like toy candy Howard the Duck heads that were sold. There was trading cards. There were Howard the Duck trading cards by Topps. There were storybooks. There were I think it was like a read-along book with a cassette tape. There was a novelization by one of the editors for National Lampoon's magazine, Ellis Weiner. And it's actually a really great novelization. Even if you don't like the movie, I actually do recommend the novelization if you can get your hands on it. It's witty, it's funny. It actually is, in some ways, better than the movie, especially its sense of humor. And it's really clever. It's right up there with the type of clever stuff you'd see in a novel by the guy who did Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And I mean that. I mean, the whole opening is this really existential, crazy fourth wall breaking moment where the narrator is communicating to you via this novel. It is a very unique novelization, and it makes sense that for a unique film you have a very unique novelization to go with it. There was t-shirts, there's all kinds of stuff. There was an official movie poster magazine. I mean, this film was pretty heavily marketed by Universal. I don't even know what the budget was for their marketing. It must have been a decent amount of money. And it just was not meant to be. This is not really going to be one of those films that was going to be a huge, big hit. But I think Universal they did it because they had passed on a lot of Lucas's other projects. And they didn't want to pass again because it's George Lucas. At this point in time, everything he touched turned to gold. So, yeah, it's a movie about a talking duck from outer space, but George Lucas is really wanting to make this. George Lucas is one of the producers. So Universal, it's understandable that they were like, yes, we want this movie. And they weren't alone. I mean, you'd be surprised. There were other studios that were trying to get in on the action too. It's a George Lucas production. This man was king in the 80s, in around this time period. And also, that helped the film get made, but it also hindered the movie because it just made it so the expectations for it were just through the stratosphere and all the way into outer space. There was no way it was ever going to live up to those expectations that people had for it, that critics had for it. Critics then took this movie and tore it to shreds and turned it into duck kebab because, hey, it's the George Lucas production. George Lucas is involved with the movie. And there were a lot of critics who just wanted to find any kink, any crack in George's armor at that time, and they found it, and they just shattered this film. They tore a new asshole because, hey, the opportunity presented itself finally to take this guy down a peg. And yeah, you can, I can see why a lot of people find this to be a bad film. It does have some issues. But unlike some other movies where they have some of the same problems, it doesn't affect my enjoyment of the film that much. And part of it might be because I grew up with the film. That I'm just going to be honest, I definitely have some nostalgic feelings for it. But there are other movies that I grew up with that I don't like. I grew up watching Batman and Robin. I probably watched that the most out of all the Batman movies that I had on VHS. I know, it's sad. Batman and Robin. As an adult, I cannot even... It's extremely difficult for me to even sit down and watch that movie. I don't feel the same way about Howard the Duck. So, I think there's... I think there's a lot... I don't know if a lot is... Well, there is a lot to like. At least for me. There's a lot to like about Howard the Duck. So the film was directed by Willard Hyuck, and it has a screenplay by Willard Hyuck and Gloria Katz. Now, these were both writers who were good friends of George Lucas, and he actually personally asked them to come in and help with the screenplay. And originally they wanted it to be an animated movie, like Heavy Metal or Fritz the Cat, but that didn't happen because, let's face it, in this particular time period, animated movies were bombs. They were huge box office flops. Not even a company with such an established brand name like Disney could have a hit at this time. I mean, you had Fox and the Hound, bomb. The Black Cauldron, a really, really big bomb for Disney. And Universal just was not going to touch an animated Howard the Duck movie with a 10-meter cattle prod. So George ended up saying, "All right, let's. I don't think animation's going to work. Let's do it live action. And we'll have ILM do the visual effects." And that appeased Universal, and then the film was put on the fast track for development. I personally would have been interested. I really would have liked to have seen the animated Howard the Duck movie. How would that look? That would have been interesting. If it was anywhere near as awesome as Heavy Metal, that would have been really cool. And I do feel that if this film was animated, it wouldn't be hated as much. Because there's a certain... people tend to not be as harsh on certain things if they're animated, unless it's something like A Crazy Nights, but that's just a train wreck, and that's just a shitty film. But, yeah, it would have been interesting. And I do feel if they were going to do another Howard the Duck, I would like to see it done animated. I would love to see an animated Netflix series like BoJack Horseman with Howard the Duck. I think that would work. Because then Howard isn't limited by what he can do, and there's more you can do with Howard in an animated way. I mean, look at the show Duckman, for instance. Duckman, in a lot of ways, is just Howard the Duck. It's just a more cynical version of the character. So they helped with the screenplay. I mean, they actually wrote the screenplay. They helped George with Star Wars. So they were, and that's another thing. I mean, George Lucas's name attached to the product really made people think, like, oh, George Lucas, Star Wars, Howard the Duck is the next Star Wars. Never. It was never going to be that way. Never. So Willard Hyuck and Gloria Katz were they were stuck between a rock and a hard place when they started writing this, because it was such a bizarre movie. It was a weird comic. We're going to adapt this strange comic into a movie, try to make it appeal to as wide of an audience as possible, and just keep our fingers crossed and hope to God that this actually makes any money. And that's not, and it didn't. It didn't. And it's crazy that another reason why they went to live action is because they thought it would make more money that way. And it's pretty ironic because this is considered one of the biggest flops of all time. And yeah, adjusted to inflation, the $36 million budget is close to like over $70 million. That's a ridiculous amount of money to spend at that time on a movie about a talking duck from outer space. And this other thing, I'm like, what were people expecting? Star Wars? Because of Lucas? It's a movie about a talking duck from outer space. That's what it is. I mean, if you read the comic, I think you might enjoy the film more because, okay, I'm familiar with this character. I know it's a talking duck movie. You know, he comes from outer space and he lands on Earth, and it's weird and it's crazy and it's silly, but there's a certain charm to it. And I felt that the charm from the comic is definitely present here. The edgier tone isn't, but they had to kind of cut that out in order to try to make it appeal to more of a wider audience, because it's a George Lucas movie. They wanted to get the Star Wars audience. That's not what happened, but that's what they wanted out of the movie. Which is crazy. When you watch the film, it's like, yeah, we want it to appeal to a wider audience, but it's got a lot of adult innuendos. It's got a biker gang, an all-female biker gang called Satan's Sluts. You got, like, the hot tub scene. You got all this other, the hot tub fever sequence. You got all these, there's just all these moments, the sequences with Beverly and Howard, and she's coming on to him, and there's this sexual tension going on between Beverly and a duck. You know, it's like, we got bestiality, we got duck tits, we got Satan sluts. You know, it's just one of those. It's one of those things that makes the film unique and makes it stand out, but it's also one of those things that's like, it's a really serious shift in tone. It's like, we got a duck who drinks beer and smokes cigars. It says damn, and you know, and then you're all and then you got some kitty jokes, and you got some, you know, duck puns and this other stuff. It's like, maybe the film would be better received if it had a better, more consistent tone, but then also it would not have as much of a cult following if it wasn't as insane as it is. So it's one of those things where I'm like, yeah, it's kind of a negative, but at the same time, it's kind of a positive for the film, because it's one of the things that makes the film definitely a very unique experience to sit down and watch. So, yeah, they took out the edgier tone. They took a villain called, I think it was Thog from the Underworld. And he was from the Nexus of Sominus, where he was from this galaxy of Sominus, which they changed the Nexus of Sominus for the film, and they turned him into the Dark Overlord, so Howard could have a nemesis for the movie. And so they did that, and with the characters, there are a few things that, you know, Beverly, her relationship with Howard is definitely, it's not as explicit as it had gotten in the comics, although it gets pretty close in that one scene that everybody talks about. But that scene still isn't as explicit as a lot of people say it is. They don't fuck, and they were never going to fuck. There was never going to be human to duck intercourse. It was never going to happen. It was all just play on both sides. Beverly was screwing with Howard, and Howard was screwing with her. There was never really any intent there for bestiality, but you know, it does seem like it. I have to admit it. It's kind of a hard thing to skirt around and to do in a way to make it so it's like, oh no, it's not really happening. We're just kidding. It is kind of a difficult thing to do. But yeah, and it is crazy when you think about it that the first theatrical film based on a Marvel property, on a Marvel comic character, is Howard the Duck. Of all the things, this movie, this character, not Spider-Man, you know, the Hulk, there was TV movies based on the Hulk, but this was the first one. Not Spider-Man, not the Punisher, not X-Men, not Fantastic Four, Howard the Duck. Not even Captain America. I mean, there were some serials in the 40s. There was a Captain America serial, but Howard the Duck was the first Marvel movie, which is, when you look at Marvel now, it's hard to believe this is where it started. So, yeah, you have a screenplay by Willard, Hyuck, and Gloria Katz, which, on one hand, there are some positives here. I think they did a good job recapturing the spirit of the comics. Howard is a likable character. He's sympathetic. It's a character that I really liked, and I would love to have a beer with this Howard, with this duck. But it does have some serious flaws. The tone is off. It can be adult, and then it's trying to be for kids. The humor at times is genuinely funny, but there's not really very many moments where it is really funny. That's one thing about the film that I really personally felt needed some work, because there was a lot of just groan-inducing lines that were just like, oh, this is just lame. And it was really painful as an adult to oh man, yeah, that is bad. There's some really bad ones. There's some fun ones though, like the Dark Overlords, the sequences with the Dark Overlords, some nice bits of black humor. She took my eggs. And even dumb lines. Like, even some of the bad lines have their own endearing qualities to them. Like this one. Hostility is like a psychic boomerang. Like, that line for some reason always sticks with me because it's just so weird. You're like, what in the hell is this waitress talking about? So, there are some, fun lines. But, yeah, there's a lot of them that are bad. Like, the stuff with the cops... oh, what are you gonna charge him for? Illegal alien. You're like, oh. There are moments like that with the script where you're just like, oh my god, this needed somebody who really, like Steve Gerber maybe should have came in and wrote lines for his own character, or have someone like Fred Decker, or some kind of writer who actually knows how to make genuinely funny lines and consistently funny lines. Not the same writers who were behind Best Defense, which was a horrible film, which is that should be on the list of some of the worst movies ever made. I mean, this is a masterpiece compared to Best Defense. A movie so bad that it was shelved by the studio, and they brought in Eddie Murphy to shoot scenes that aren't even connected with the film. They're just random cameo scenes of Eddie Murphy just doing random shit in order to get the film released into theaters, and it still was a huge bomb. And I think that was the film they did before this. I'm not gonna give any Best Defense for Best Defense. I'll do it for Howard the Duck, but not for Best Defense. If you think Howard the Duck is bad, watch Best Defense. I mean, that movie is one of the worst comedies I've ever seen in my life. So... and definitely one of Eddie Murphy's worst. And one of Dudley Moore's worst. So, yeah, I mean, the script, humor, definitely need a lot of work. There was too many duck puns. There was just a lot of jokes that were just really lame. And the comic definitely had funnier, wittier moments than the movie did. Although there were a few lines of dialogue that I did like, and I do remember. But, yeah, this is pretty slim pickings when it comes to the film's humor. But I mean, the character development is fine, and this plot structure is another thing I honestly think could have used some work. A lot of the film's problems is with the screenplay. In fact, I personally think all of the film's problems lie with the screenplay: humor, tone, plot structure. The plot structure of the film. I personally think the last 50 minutes or the last hour of the movie, when the Dark Overlord is starting to get introduced into the plot, is without a doubt the best parts of the film. And I feel that if that was the focus of the movie earlier on, then I think more people would like the movie, because, yeah, it's a weird concept, but this is the 80s we're talking about. This is a decade where we had huge hits with plots like this. A man falls in love with a department store mannequin that comes to life. Mannequin. That was a big hit. A guy falls in love with a mermaid. That's Splash. A robot gets struck by lightning and then it thinks it's alive. That's Short Circuit. I mean, there was a hit. I think it came out in '86 as well. I mean, so this wasn't that bizarre of a plot thread or a plot idea for an 80s movie. I mean, we had Weekend at Bernie's, where it was a fun comedy where it was basically a movie about these guys who were parading around this dead guy as if he was alive. And it was all done with a straight face, and it was all like, oh, zany hijinks with this dead guy. I mean, this is the 80s. I mean, a movie about a talking duck from outer space is not that far out of left field for this particular decade. So, yeah, I mean, but I mean, the script, though, there are some great stuff. I mean, a lot of it, though, is in the last half of the film. It feels like the last half of the movie is a completely different film than the first half. The first hour is just kind of just going through the motions. Howard being a fish out of water on Earth in Cleveland, and I can have some fun with it, but it doesn't feel very, I don't know, it feels kind of TV. It feels like a TV movie. It feels like an episode. It has sort of an episodic sort of feel to it, like it's a part of a 2-part pilot episode for a Howard the Duck TV show. But then you have the last 50 minutes to an hour, and it's got full of pyrotechnics and car crashes and a really exciting, thrilling ultralight chase sequence with an ultralight plane. Something that I've never seen done before or since. And then you got the stuff with the Dark Overlord with effects by ILM, and you got great stop motion effects by Phil Tippett. You got they end the film with a really fun concert with Cherry Bomb and Lea Thompson singing this extremely catchy Howard the Duck song while Howard is playing guitar, and it's just like, where was this movie the whole time? There's a reason why I like this film, and the reason why is because of this last half. This last half is awesome, in my opinion. It is a lot of fun. So, the film also features a score by John Barry, and who also, he didn't really do the entire score, but because Sylvester LeVay did some work as well for the score, and both of them combined together to deliver one of the most underrated scores of the 80s, in my opinion. This score is prime. It is some prime grade A shit. I think this is a really great score. I've always liked this score, the main theme, the stuff they use for the ultralight sequence, even the stuff they have for the sequences of Beverly and Howard. It is a really great score. And even if you don't like the movie, I recommend you listen to the music. And not only the score, but the soundtrack. The soundtrack by Thomas Dolby and Lea Thompson and the girls. They actually sang and played their own instruments. Like, who does that now? And Lea was so convincing with her singing in this. I think she was better than some girl bands from that era. I really think she could have made an album and could have turned out some nice music, some nice tunes. I like Hunger City. It's probably my favorite one that Cherry Bomb did, and of course I enjoy the Howard the Duck song that play at the end. But yeah, it's a really underrated soundtrack, from the songs to the score. The film has some wonderful cinematography by Richard H. Klein, who did cinematography for films like The Andromeda Strain, and here he tries to make the film look more like a comic book, and it definitely does show with the way he lights the film. I love how he lights the film with all these different colors and things like that, especially in the film's climax at the Dynatechnics Institute. And the movie has, in my opinion, a really solid cast. You got Chip Zien, who really brings Howard to life as the voice of Howard the Duck. I know there was rumors like Richard Dreyfuss or some of these other people, but I personally feel that Chip Zien was a great choice. I think it's Zien or Zien, however you say his last name. I've always liked his voice acting for this role, and he had the perfect spunk, he had the perfect attitude and sardonic line delivery for this character, and it was a real shame to me to not hear his voice coming out of Howard in the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, where Howard had a cameo and Chip Zien wasn't asked to be brought back on, and maybe he was and he declined, and that's fine, but I just, when I see Howard, I think of him, I think of Chip Zien. I hear Chip Zien's voice in my head when I read a Howard the Duck comic. I don't hear Seth Green. Lea Thompson's great casting as Beverly Switzer. She is like at the peak of her hotness in this. She's got the teased up hair, this pure 80s and pure hotness. I mean, I had totally had a crush on her when I was a kid. Totally. It was her in Back to the Future, and her even more in this is Beverly. She does the best she can with the lines she's given. There are some lines that are kind of cringy, but you know, she's doing the best with what she has to work with, and she does a good job. She's charming, she's sweet, she has nice chemistry with Howard. Tim Robbins plays Phil Blumbert, and I get a kick out of his performance. It's not one of his best performances, but it's really a lot of fun to watch a film like Howard the Duck, and to see Tim Robbins, such an established, serious actor, just goof off. It's a lot of fun to see him do that. You know, to just be all like wacka wacka wacka. You know, just it's just endearing to me. I really do enjoy his performance in this as this wacky mad scientist, Phil Blumbert. Howard, can you burn a hole through this with your laser eyes, with your eye laser? Can I bite your nose off with my super bill? So, you know, there's some really fun moments with those two. You even have some little roles by some actual more well-known actors, like David Paymer plays one of the guys who works at the Institute. Paul Guilifoyle, who you've seen in like a lot of things, like Law and Order, all these like serious crime shows. Here he's in the film with hair as Lieutenant Welker. I didn't even recognize him because I've never seen this guy with hair. He's always like bald. And here he is with a full head of hair and talking about, I want that duck, dead or alive. You're just like, holy shit. This guy who's known for being in these super serious crime dramas is in Howard the Duck as this detective who's all like, I want that duck. It was such a crazy contrast. You even have Richard Edson, who was also in Super Mario Brothers. There's another crazy cult movie, and he's in this as like one of the guys who works for Richie, the scumbag band manager. And then you also have Ed Gale, who plays Howard in The Suit. And The Suit cost $2 million to make. And contrary to what a lot of people say about The Suit, I think The Suit looks great. I think it still looks great to this day. I think it's a very impressive practical effect. It was dealing with stuff that had never been done before, never been seen before with animatronics, with the animatronic duck head and things like that. They had casted originally a kid who was acting the suit, but he didn't do a very good job. So then Ed Gale, who was one of the stunt ducks, he was brought on and really last minute to try to salvage the film. And because Howard's the main attraction. If Ed Gale didn't really bring his A game, if Chip Zien didn't really deliver a really heartwarming and entertaining and fun voiceover, the film would not be anywhere near as good to me, or definitely not as much fun to watch. And I could see why people would consider it to be a total piece of shit if those elements didn't work. But they worked. Ed Gale, I mean, he gets more fan mail from people about his role as Howard in this than his role as Chucky, because he was in the Chucky suit in a lot of the Child's Play films. And yeah, if I wrote some fan mail to Chip, I'd be sending him my warmest regards and, you know, saying and thanking him for his performance in this film, because it's a really nice performance by Ed Gale. He also, without his work, Chip Zien isn't able to, you know, bring the character to life. I mean, both of them played equal parts in bringing this character to life and really making it a character that, to me, to this day, is a very memorable character and a very endearing, likable duck who you want to sit down and you just hang out with, smoke a cigar, and drink a brewski. You know, maybe I'll read a Playboy and he can read some Play Duck. But yeah, you just want to hang out with this duck because you know, and I didn't think he was he was toned down so much that he was like Donald Duck or anything. Donald Duck doesn't drink beer. Donald Duck doesn't smoke cigars. Donald Duck doesn't call people toots. Maybe he does. Donald Duck doesn't do the stuff that Howard does in this movie. So yeah, the cast I really do think is they, you know, they do all do their jobs really well. And of course, I can't forget Jeffery Jones as Dr. Jennings. I mean, it's one of my favorite performances by Jeffrey. It's a shame that he was busted for kiddie porn later in his career, and it's one of those things where it's hard not to think about that now. but even with that, it's still a good performance, and you can tell he's having a blast playing this bad guy. If you can't take the heat, get out of the kitchen. It's closing time. Yeah, is this a very entertaining, fun, villainous performance? As soon as the Dark Overlord takes over his body and he's all evil and everything, the film gets instantly better. Smog inspection. Yeah, it's just a very entertaining, villainous performance. And one of the main selling point, another huge main selling point for me for about this film is the effects. Industrial Light and Magic really outdo themselves here. And I know I said I'll try to do a shorter video. That video's like over an hour. So this will still be pretty long, but it won't be that long. Because I'm getting down to the home stretch here. But Industrial Light and Magic really outdid themselves here. And they do not get enough credit for their hard work for Howard the Duck. They invented not one but two different visual effects techniques for this film that had never been used before and never been done before. One was to use a computer program to digitally remove wires, which is something we take for granted every day, and you see that all the time in films, and you saw it in tons of films after this. But Howard the Duck doesn't seem to get its just desserts, it's credit for that. The pat on the back. And not only that, but they also invented this way to be able to have actors interact with their surroundings. With a stop motion effect sequence, for instance. And they found a way to make it so they can interact with these effect sequences live and on camera, which is something that was just never done then. Because they were acting, here's a monster, and it's a vacuum cleaner, or something. Or here's a tennis ball. No. Here, they actually found a way to make it so the actors can interact with these monsters, or with the stuff that's going on, with the effects on screen. And that was huge for effects going forward. So, and that's a big reason why the effects are so great. That's why they still hold up so well. That's why when you watch them on Blu-ray and in HD, it is just mind-blowing. You're just like, wow, these are some really impressive effects. I mean, ILM outdid themselves here. I think Howard the Duck has some of the best visual effects out of any film in this particular decade. I really do feel that way about this movie. The visual effects are that impressive. The stuff with the Dark Overlord, with his eye lasers, with all this type of stuff. The opening sequence when Howard is sucked into outer space in his chair and taken to Earth. The stuff with the Dark Overlord, with the blend of live action and stop motion in a seamless way that had not been really attempted and done before in that particular way. Because there always seemed like there was that disconnect where the actors weren't there and weren't interacting with the stop motion in real time. But that's what this film was, one of the first films to actually showcase that in the climax. In a lot of films afterwards, like Back to the Future Part 2, the hoverboard sequences, they were made possible and they look as amazing as they do to this day because of the effects techniques that ILM invented for Howard the Duck. So, the Razzies can go fuck themselves. And yeah, I've got so animated, things got out of focus. I apologize. The Razzies can go fuck themselves because this movie is absolutely 100% not worthy of its worst visual effects award. Fuck that bullshit. That's just bullshit. This is not some of the worst visual effects. This is some of the best visual effects. It also has some of the best stunt work. And practical explosion. I mean, there's a scene in this that I will never forget, and it always makes me like giddy when I see it. When I saw it as a kid, I was like, whoa, that was awesome. And as an adult, I'm even more like, whoa, that was really awesome. And that sequence is when the Dark Overlord, there's a smog inspection scene, and he just uses his powers to blow up car after car after car after car after car in a row. And it's all done practically. You don't see that nowadays. That's unheard of. And then you have the ultralight sequence with Joe Johnston, who would go on to direct The Rocketeer, and also another one of my favorite films he helped create, is also just a really thrilling, fun sequence. It's very unique. You don't see a chase scene with an ultralight. And then you have, of course, the editing. Michael Chandler and Sidney Wolinski also helped really make everything work really well too, especially in the ultralight sequences in the last 50 minutes of the movie. So with all those things that work about the movie, like I said, there were a few things that don't work. We'll list them off real quick. They mainly do with the story, with the script. You got the weird tone. The tone could be more consistent. The humor definitely needed some better dialogue, some wittier dialogue. It just needed to be funnier for an idea that is this absurd. It really needed to be funnier than it is. I'm just imagining, what if you had like Mel Brooks behind this? This could have been a real classic if you had Mel Brooks helming a Howard the Duck movie. So there's that. The plot structure, I think they should have introduced an antagonist earlier on. The Dark Overlord should have been introduced about 20-30 minutes in, and then had all this craziness, had a little bit of the intro stuff with Beverly and Howard in the beginning, then right into the Dark Overlord stuff, and have the movie be like an hour and a half. At an hour and 50-something minutes is a bit too long, and that hurts the film's pacing, which is another issue. Film starts to sag in the middle where Howard's trying to find a job or whatever and all that stuff. But it really picks up pace when you get to the 40-50 minute mark. So those are the main problems I have with the movie. It's all plot structure. It's plot structure, script. It's all script. It's all has to do with the script. But everything else I genuinely really enjoy about the movie. I have a lot of fun with the film. I really do think that the film is full of a lot more adventure than humanly possible, and I would recommend the movie. If I was going to rate the film out of 5 stars, I would give Howard the Duck 4 out of 5, because I like it that much. The problems I have with it encapsulated together aren't enough to really affect my overall rating of the film that much, because the movie I could still sit down and watch and really enjoy and have a good time with it. So I would actually recommend the film. If you haven't seen the movie and you're curious about it, you've heard a lot of bad things about it, you've heard about its reputation, but you're curious about it, you've seen the trailer, or you are curious about Howard the Duck because you like the cameo appearances in the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, then I would recommend the film. I think there's a movie you should at least give it a chance, see it at least once. If you like movies like the Super Mario Brothers film, the live-action Super Mario Brothers movie, definitely check this out if you haven't already. And even if you don't end up liking it, I can definitely say this, without a doubt, the film is at least unique. It's at least unique. It's not going to be an experience that you've witnessed before or you've experienced before. It's definitely going to be different. It may not be something you end up liking or end up caring for, but I think everyone who's seen this film can at least say this. It's unique. It's definitely a one-of-a-kind film, and it's definitely a new breed of hero. So anyway, thanks for watching my long-winded review and retrospective of Howard the Duck, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. I know it was a long one, but it's still shorter than the other one I did. Anyway, I will see you guys later, and thanks for watching. See ya.